Hello everybody and welcome to the second ever episode of Games I've Wanted to Play, a new retro series here in which I delve into gaming's history and play through titles that have always intrigued me but I've never had the chance to check out. Now this could include hidden gems that I might have heard of in passing or big blockbuster titles that just eluded me. In the first episode we took a look at the survival horror game Dino Crisis, which I very much enjoyed, and today we're going to stick on the horror track and look at Squaresofts Parasite Eve. Now this was released in 1998 on the PlayStation. It was Squaresoft's first ever M-rated game. Now this is a game that frequently appears on lists of best ever PlayStation games, but it's one that I've never really had the opportunity to check out. It's never actually released here in the UK, only seen a release in the US and Japan, and despite emulation obviously being a thing, it's one that I never have put aside the time to check out until today. So, the game itself is an action role-playing game with horror elements. I was quite interested to learn that it's based on a novel of the same name. It actually kind of serves as a sequel to that novel. This game itself was produced by Hironobu Sakaguchi, who obviously you know as the creator of Final Fantasy, and it was directed by Takashi Tokita, who had been the lead designer for Final Fantasy IV and Chrono Trigger. So, what am I expecting from this game? So I'll admit I'm not really sure. It's a title that I've been recommended quite a lot. I've got some friends who have recommended I play it, but I've never really seen much of it myself. I don't know what the battle system's going to be like. I don't know what the overworld elements will be like. And I'm quite intrigued to see how they incorporate horror elements into a JRPG back in 1998. I don't think I'm going to be expecting many jump scares here. I don't think they'll be a big part of the game. Based on the name itself, I'm expecting quite a bit of sort of body horror. And I know there is one scene early on in the game, perhaps the opening, which was seen to be quite graphic and shocking, especially, you know, for a 1998 Squaresoft title. As mentioned, this was their first ever M-rated game. But I'm admittedly not really sure what to expect. That term action role-playing game has kind of thrown me a little bit, because when I think of an action role-playing game, especially in the late 90s, my mind does kind of turn to something like The Adventures of Alundra, or going back even further than that, Link to the Past, or maybe, you know, the contemporary Zelda games around then. But from what I understand, this isn't really a game where you press a button and it swings a sword or fires a gun. I think there is some sort of, you know, turn-based elements in there perhaps, so I'll be quite interested to see how they do that. So, with all of that said, let's actually delve into the game. Parasite Eve tells the story of Aya, a female cop in New York City who, on Christmas Eve, goes on a date to the opera. Whilst there, during one of the pivotal moments of the show, the lead actress starts to act just a little bit strange, and things very rapidly take a turn for the worse, as you can see yourself right now. I loved this opening cutscene. I thought it looked fantastic, especially given the time that it was made. It's one of those ones that I think you look back on what the PlayStation could do, and that is like up there at the very height of what the PlayStation was capable of. And there were some more cutscenes later on that are just sort of, you know, not awe-inspiring, but they're just really kind of like powerhouse showcases for that console. So at this point I've played about an hour and a bit of the game, so I've got a fairly decent grasp of it. The main thing that really stands out is the battle system. Again, I really like this. It feels quite unique. I don't think I've came across a battle system quite like this. It's kind of, it is a real-time like action RPG system. In fact, you've got freedom of movement around the battlefield. Now, it's a random battle thing, so you'll be walking around, you'll get in the random battle, then you'll have free movement around the arena, but you'll have like an active timer going, similar to Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy VII, and once this hits the required limit, you'll go into selecting your move. Now, the way it kind of works is you're given firearms, or you can have like a melee weapon, but the primary usage is firearms. You also have your parasite powers, so you'll pull up whatever you want to do, select your target, and while you're shooting, you'll be routed to the spot to do your moves, and then you'll go back to that freedom of movement. Now, it's quite cool because you can dodge the enemy attacks as they're making them, Sometimes it's quite tricky to do so in some of the more cramped like arenas, but it's not overly difficult. The other interesting thing is when you fire at an enemy, you have a certain number of shots depending on the weapon you're using. So that kind of ties into it as well, because if you've got multiple enemies on screen, say you've got 3 enemies on screen and you focus on one, but you fire all 3 shots at it, you're stood still for the duration of that, but your enemies aren't. So it's quite a lot of interesting sort of tactical choices you can make, and like I said, I've only played an hour and a half up to this point, so I'm interested to see how it develops going forward, but I really, really liked what I saw. You also have access to kind of parasite powers as you unlock over the course of the game. I've only unlocked about 4 at the moment, but there's like a heal, there's a slowdown one, a scan, and one called detox, which cures you of poison. Now, the way this works is you don't have like an MP pool like traditional JRPGs. It's like based on a meter, so when you use it, it takes up a chunk of that meter, and then you have to wait for it to recharge to use that power again. And again, this kind of links into the tactical choices you make throughout the game. Is it better for you to sort of focus fire on your enemy? Is it better for you to heal and use a parasite power and such? It's, yeah, there's a lot to think about, and I'm intrigued to see how, as the game goes on, how all of this will tie together. Now, the other thing I will say is that the controls in the game are quite tanky. I did have trouble at moments with the characters sometimes running and then walking and only walking in certain directions. Had a few difficulties lining up with objects to interact with them. Now, this might be more of a me problem. This is an old game, of course, and back then you didn't really have a lot of, like, I don't want to call them modern conveniences like prompts appearing on screen to tell you what you can and can't interact with. So you might miss things here and there, like lockers or such, but it's not that big a problem. It does feel quite tanky. The camera angles remind me of other contemporary horror games from back then. But it controls fairly well. It's not really going to be a problem, and it certainly hasn't been a problem in the fights. As expected, so far, there's been quite an amount of body horror. Like I said, I've played about an hour and a half, and I think I've seen 2 of the big scenes. I've seen the opening with what happens at the opera, and I've seen the moment inside Central Park as well, which you will now see. But yeah, I'm really excited to play more and learn more about this world. I do really like what I'm playing. I like the sort of the way the main character is. I'm interested to unravel more of her story. I'm interested to unravel more of the overall story, which seems to revolve around the idea of, and I might pronounce things wrong, but it's the idea of mitochondria, which I might get this wrong, but they're a part of our cells, and it's theorized, certainly in the game, that these used to be a separate organism, but merged to form what we have humans, and now the mitochondria are evolving and becoming their own distinct entity again, at the expense of humanity. So I'm intrigued to see how that goes, but yeah, it's a very interesting story. The characters so far, I do like them. With being set in New York in a police department, all the characters kind of remind me of that sort of stereotypical police procedural you might see, like American police drama. So you've got like your partner who you work with, who's like kind of seems like a humble, down to earth kind of guy. You've got the chief that you go report to, who's very much about, you know, setting the right image and, you know, keeping tabs on the media and making sure they don't run with stories and panic the people, that kind of thing. But yeah, so far, initial impressions of the first hour and a half, very, very good. So I'm going to go play more now, and I'll check in when I'm done. So, a few days and about 10 to 11 hours of gameplay later, reached the end of the game. So I guess just time to kind of gather my final thoughts on it. You know, what did I think of Parasite Eve as a whole? Am I glad I made the effort to actually play it? As you just saw, my initial impressions of it after the first hour and a half were really, really positive. Really enjoyed what I saw, what I played, how the game felt to control, its battle system. And over the remaining 10 hours or so of gameplay, nothing really changed, if I'm being honest with you. The combat system kind of went from strength to strength, if anything. There were a few little issues here and there, and that goes back to what I said originally about the size of the battle arena. Sometimes some of these little battle arenas were quite small, so you weren't able to dodge the enemy attacks. The clearest example of this I can give is in the warehouse level. You have to fight through about 3 or 4 screens, and you'll get to this bridge, which is quite a narrow sort of strip of, pathing, because it's a bridge. You'll enter a random battle there, and there's two like spider enemies either side of you. You can't really dodge their attacks at all. But what these spider enemies do is they fire webs at you, which cause a detrimental ability, which cause you to slow down, and then they come into attack, and they've got quite a fierce attack. It takes quite a lot of health, especially for that portion of the game. Now, when I looked this up after playing the game and seeing what people thought of it, I didn't personally encounter this issue. But after that bridge encounter, you fight a crab boss, which is quite tough in of itself. At least I found it quite tough. There were ways to kind of dodge its attacks. But you can fight them again after you're done with that battle, and if you use a lot of health items, or you're not at high health, or your parasite energy hasn't recharged, then that can be a problem if you run into that boss, those enemies. But that was like the best example I can think of where the battle arena worked against you. There are a few other examples. You might know from most JRPGs, when you go into a random encounter, the arenas tend to be the same every single time, and you don't have to move about them. But with this, every single time you hit a random encounter, it was the camera angle could change, and sometimes the camera angles made it a little bit difficult. But that's pretty much my only criticism, really, of the battle system. I thought it was really, really fun. I enjoyed that mixture of turn-based, the active time component, with you being able to run around freely, and it made for some really cool and tense encounters, especially with the bosses towards the end of the game. Now, next, I guess, the story, I was quite positive about that. It started off really strongly. As I expected, it wasn't really... It wasn't a scary game. It certainly had horror elements to it, but there weren't really any jump scares in there. There were a few enemies where, they were a bit grotesque. Some of the cutscenes were quite grotesque. I guess, put in context of the time when this came out, it looked fantastic, and there probably wasn't really much around like it at that time, especially the levels of sort of body horror and morphing of, creatures that went on back then. So I can imagine it maybe had a few elements of scariness back then, but coming at it, it's 2022 now. This game came out in 1998. We're talking 24-ish years. It's a long time, and there's been a lot of development since, but I can very easily imagine if they remade this today, just what it would look like, and I think it, could look absolutely incredible. Story itself was told super well. I really enjoyed it from beginning to end. I was really drawn into the whole mystery, the whole idea that it was presenting to me. It felt kind of... It's one of those stories that felt kind of grounded, because it spoke about something that's innate in humans, like the whole mitochondria thing. And the idea that you have this thing living inside you that has always been there, but it's been biding its time to eventually rise up and take over. I really liked that. It was a great premise. It just really, really cool to sort of see that done. It made me excited to play the sequel, actually, which I went out and bought. This one I had to play via an emulator, because it never came out in the UK, and to get hold of it legally costs a hell of a lot of money. Getting the sequel wasn't exactly cheap, but it was like £30 to £40. Getting hold of the original would be over 100. But that's, by the by, that's retro gaming for you at the moment. But yeah, I just really enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the characters. It felt quite grounded. There wasn't really any sort of cheesiness or silliness within it. There were a few moments here or there, but overall, really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, I don't really have a lot of negative things to say about the game. The camera angles at times were awkward and fighting, but overall I felt the battle system it could be tough but fair. When you lost a battle, you could kind of see quite easily why you had lost that. Getting to grips with all of the mechanics was fairly self-explanatory. I guess the one thing I would say, and this is coming from looking at modern games where everything is sort of tutorialized for you in the game, it took me a while to get grips with the tool system and the super tool system where you upgrade your weapons. So what happens in this is you can collect multiple weapons of the same type, and you can use tools to graft the abilities or the stats from that weapon onto the previous one, at the expense of one of them. So it works really well, and it allows you to build up some interesting combinations of weapons. I just kind of wish I'd got the grips with it a little bit sooner, because there was one instance where I put like a 1.5 random modifier on a rifle, which meant I couldn't target individual enemies, and maybe if I had planned a little bit sooner, I'd have got some more powerful weapons, but it wasn't really detrimental to the game, me not fully understanding that until later on. So, not really that much of a problem. And I guess, if I had the manual in front of me or done a bit more research beforehand, I probably would have understood that. But I wanted to go in fairly blind. I didn't want to know too much about it before I went in, because I kind of wanted a more pure experience. As far as other things go, the rest of the systems and mechanics were pretty self-explanatory. Using your parasite abilities was cool. You unlocked more over time. Using the weapons themselves, each one had its advantages and disadvantages. Fairly easy to get a grips with. And it was really good. Length for the game, about 10 or so hours it took me to complete it. That is one thing to say, though, is that while I have completed the game, after you complete it, you do unlock what's called an EX mode. Now, my belief is that this has an extra sort of section, which kind of gives you an extra ending. Now, I haven't done that yet, but I do intend to. But I wanted to wrap up this video having completed the main bulk of the game and gotten, one of the endings. This isn't, the whole point of this series isn't to do completionist runs. It's just to kind of complete the core game or do as good as I can. But I definitely... The fact that I do want to delve back in and get that extra ending should actually speak for how much I enjoyed it. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed the game. I would heartily recommend anyone checking it out. I think you can come at it if you haven't, if you've not played games from that era. I think you could play it now and you'd still enjoy it. It's pretty simple enough to pick up and play. There's nothing really that, aside from the graphics, it fits in pretty well. It controls fine. The battle system's fine. The music's great. It doesn't feel clunky. One of my issues with Dino Crisis was I had the tank controls, or if I went back to play an old Resident Evil or Tomb Raider, they are very much products of the time. This doesn't really feel too hard to go back to, if that makes sense. So I would absolutely 100% recommend people go back to it. It was just such a really good game to play. I can see why now it pops up on lists of, best PlayStation games, why it sort of seems an iconic series. And one of the things I kept on saying when I spoke to people about it while I was playing is it was such a shame that it never originally came out in the UK. And it's kind of a shame that, aside from the sequel and the one on PSP, that we haven't really revisited that series a lot in the past. And I guess you can't always revisit every series from the past. You've got to develop new IPs. You've got to pick and choose, because there's a whole risk thing of development and all that. But I think this would really, really benefit from a modern day remake, much the same as I thought Dino Crisis would. I think this is prime fodder for it. Just such a good game. If you do get the opportunity, go and check it out. I really enjoyed my time with it. It's not the longest game. It's not the hardest game in the world. It's really, really good. Great story, great cast, great gameplay, great music. I think, anyone could enjoy it. So, there you have it, everyone. That is episode 2 of Games I've Wanted to Play done. I hope you really enjoyed watching this. I hope you enjoyed hearing me talk about Parasite Eve, and I hope it's inspired you to check it out yourself, because that is kind of the aim of this series, really. It's for me to look at these games that I might have heard of and always kind of wanted to play, and, if I think they're good, hopefully inspire you to check them out yourself. So, with that said, let me know down below if you have decided to check the game out. Let me know if you are a fan of the game coming into this video and this has inspired you to play it again, or if you've got anything to say about it yourself. Maybe you played it back in the late 90s and you loved it and, you've always been a fan of it. Do leave a like. Do leave a comment. Let me know, what you thought of the video. This is still kind of a bit of a work in progress. We're still tweaking things here. We're still trying to get the format right, but, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. So hopefully I'll see you again soon when we do the 3rd episode of this. Check out the other videos on the channel. We've got the Enterprise D build going on again. We've got other unboxings going on. And I shall see you again in the future. Once more, thank you so much. Bye.